Hi, and welcome to A-level sociology. So, broadly speaking, sociology is the study of society. Within A-level sociology, we topics. So we look at family and education, research methods, beliefs in society, and crime and deviance. It's crime and deviance that we're going to be looking at today. So I'm just going to share my screen with you so that you can have a look at the PowerPoint with me as we go along. So today we're going to be looking at ethnicity and crime. And this is part of the crime unit that we study within sociology. So I expect we all recognise this man, and we've heard the stories permeating the news and social media around what happened to George Floyd and the subsequent protests from Black Lives Matter. So on the 25th of May this year, George Floyd was murdered. He was killed by police officers while he was being arrested. This death sparked a series of protests all around the world against police brutality, including protests that you may have seen, you may even have joined in with them in the UK. So in terms of the situation within the UK, it is not just the USA that where there's police brutality. Here are just a few examples. So Sean Rigg died in 2008 in a Brixton police station, and the police were found to have used unsuitable force. In 2011, Kingsley Burrell died. He was being detained at a mental health unit in Birmingham. In both of these cases, officers were prosecuted for giving false evidence or lying. They weren't found guilty and no one was prosecuted for the death. In 2017, Darren Cumberbatch was punched, beaten, tasered. An inquest found that the police force was excessive and avoidable. No one's been prosecuted yet. His family are waiting to hear if anybody will be. And just this year, Simeon Francis was found dead in Devon in a police cell, and we don't really know much about what happened there. What we do know is that since 1969, only one police officer has been convicted. In that case, they received a suspended sentence, so they didn't even go to prison. Now, this isn't to say that other police officers haven't been prosecuted. It's just that the jury does not have enough evidence to convict them. Perhaps what we have to look at is why the jury doesn't have enough evidence and who should be supplying that evidence. But that's probably a different lesson altogether. So what we're going to do is we're just going to unpick a little bit more about, and a little bit more broadly about ethnicity and how our Black and ethnic minority people within the UK, how their experience with the police and the criminal justice system might be different from white people's.
That's the question Labour MP David Lammy has been looking into, and here's what he found out. Let's start with convictions. For every 100 white women convicted at magistrates' court, there were 122 black women, 142 Asian women, and 111 mixed ethnic women. Turning to prison sentences. The report found no link between ethnicity and the likelihood of receiving a prison sentence for most crimes, but when it came to drug offences, ethnic minorities are around 240% more likely to be sent to prison compared to white offenders. And finally, high security prisons. ethnic minority male prisoners are more likely to be placed in high security prisons. And for every 100 white men sent to prison for public order offences, there were 417 black men and 631 Asian men. The review says ethnic minority individuals still face bias, including overt discrimination in parts of the justice system. Lammy argues there needs to be more scrutiny for those working in courts and prisons.
Okay, so in terms of some statistics, in the UK, we can see that Black people make up 3% of the population, but 13.1% of the prison population. Asians are 6.5% of the population, but 7.7% of the prison population. Now, if we were to assume that Black people, white people, Asian people are all equally likely to be criminal, then what we would expect to see is the same proportion of the population being within the prison population. So if Black people are 3% of the population, we'd expect them to be 3% of the prison population. If Asians are 6.5%, we'd expect them to be 6.5% of the prison population. But we can see that those proportions are much higher. Now, what this tells us is that while Black and Asian people are overrepresented within the criminal justice system, white people are underrepresented. So we need to have a think about that and maybe start to unpick some of the reasons why. The Ministry of Justice, their statistics show that members of our Black communities are 8 times more likely than their white counterparts to be stopped and searched, 3.5 times more likely to be arrested, and 5 times more likely to be in prison. Now, those are really quite shocking statistics. So let's just pause there for a second. Have a think, how might we be able to explain those statistics? I'd like you to try and think of at least 2 different explanations. You might be able to think of more, okay? So pause there and have a think. Okay, so here are some explanations that you might have come up with, you might have thought of, okay? So the first explanation is that the police are racist. And the police being racist, they are deliberately targeting ethnic minority groups. So they go out, they have their racist ideas, and they deliberately stop and search and target people who are Black, people who are Asian. So that's one explanation. The second explanation that you might have thought of is that maybe the police themselves as individuals are not racist, but they have stereotypes. Sociologists like to use the term label. They have labels of what they think a criminal looks like, and that leads them perhaps to target ethnic minority groups. Now, of course, these labels can be applied to lots and lots of different groups in society. So the police are more likely to label somebody who is young rather than somebody who is old. They're more likely to label somebody who is male rather than somebody who is female. But what that means is that there are certain types of people that the police are more likely to target. So as an example, if I was walking down the street, because I am white, I am female, I am middle class, I am less likely to be stopped by the police than somebody who is young, male, and perhaps ethnic minority. Now, of course, the police have no idea that I might have a bag full of drugs and guns and stolen goods. They're just working off their labels that they have, or the labels that they're applying to people in terms of being criminal or not criminal. Okay, so the next explanation that you might have come up with is that judges are racist. They give harsher penalties to ethnic minority groups. And perhaps that's how we can explain the reason why Black people are more likely to be in prison, and they're more likely to be in high security prisons. So perhaps that's an explanation. Another explanation is that we can argue that the whole criminal justice system is set up in a way that it benefits white people rather than ethnic minorities. Now, the term we use for this is institutional racism. And institutional racism can be applied to the criminal justice system, but we can also see that it can be applied to other institutions within society. So, for example, we can make arguments that the education system is institutionally racist because the way it is set up benefits white people over Black people. So just as an example, if we think about history, when we're learning about history in school, whose history are we learning about? Well, we're learning about the history of white people. So we can see that the way the education system and the teaching of history is set up perhaps benefits white people over ethnic minorities. So if we apply this to the criminal justice system, perhaps we can see that the way the criminal justice system is set up is in such a way that it will benefit white people. Now, a number of years ago, a young man named Stephen Lawrence was murdered in London. And unfortunately, the police were able to find out who killed him, but they weren't able to prosecute due to failings within the police department. And a further inquest into this found that actually the police force is institutionally racist. Okay, the last explanation that I've got here for you is that ethnic minorities are more likely to commit crime. So it's not about police racism, it's not about judges being racist. We're now saying that actually, perhaps ethnic minority groups are more likely to be criminal, and that's why they feature in the official statistics. It's another explanation. Okay, so we've talked quite a lot about the police and the judges, so let's just have a look at the staff working within the criminal justice system. So what we can see here is the proportion of white people who are working within the criminal justice system. And as you look across, we can see that 93% of police officers are white and 93% of court judges are white. So if we were going to go down the route of saying that there is racism, actually this might back it up. Maybe what we need to see is more diversity within the criminal justice system. Okay, a word of warning about official statistics. We've got to be really careful when we are looking at and using official statistics that we don't just accept them as fact. With crime statistics, they don't actually tell us how many crimes are committed, really. And they don't tell us who is committing these crimes and whether it's more likely to be one ethnic group than another ethnic group. What they tell us is about police activity. They tell us what the police are doing. So they tell us about the crimes that are reported to the police, detected by the police, and recorded by the police. They don't tell us anything about crimes that no one knows about. They also don't tell us about crimes that perhaps where the police officer has used their discretion and they've let someone off. So we just need to make sure that whenever we're looking at and thinking about official statistics, we're thinking about it critically. We're not just accepting them on face value. Okay, in a second, I'd like you to pause again. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just have a think about where your opinion lies right now. So on the far left, we would be saying that the difference in statistics represents real differences in offending. So what that means is that we think that ethnic minority groups are committing more crimes than white people. On the far right-hand side, we are saying that the differences in the statistic are due to racism. Racism in the police, the criminal justice system, and wider society, and not actual offending. Okay, so here on the right-hand side, we are saying that Black and ethnic minority groups are no more likely to commit crime than white people. Okay, so just like you to take a moment to think about where on that arrow your opinion lies. There is no right or wrong answer here. This is your opinion, and one of the great things about sociology is that you get to have your opinion, and as long as you can back it up with arguments and evidence, you're fine. So take a minute. Where would you say your opinion lies? Okay, so I'm just going to briefly go through 3 different sociological explanations. The reason we have 3 explanations is because actually sociologists can never agree with each other. We've got lots of different types of sociologists, and they all have different theories. Some are a little bit more sympathetic with others, and some really, really, really strongly disagree with each other. Now, over the 2-year sociology course, you will find that you agree more with some types of sociologists and perhaps less with other types of sociologists. But the one good thing about sociology is that you get to unpick all of these explanations, and you get to have a debate, and you get to argue with each other as to which explanation you think is the strongest. Okay, so if you like arguing, and I suspect some of you do, this might be a really, really good course for you. So 3 explanations. The first explanation that we have comes from our left realists. So left realists argue that these statistics represent real differences in offending. Ethnic minorities are more likely to commit crime than white people. Okay, so that's their stance. We'll unpick it in just a second. So left realists, just for a bit of background, left realism stems from neo-Marxism and before that Marxism. Marxism and Marxists are interested in equality and inequality in society. One of the things they're particularly interested in is inequality of power. Some people seem to have lots of power, whereas other people are powerless in society. So they're quite interested in this idea of power, and they're interested in how some people seem to have lots and other people seem to have very little. So left realists stem from, have their origins in Marxism, so they're interested in equality. So they say that ethnic minorities are more likely to commit crime. Let's unpick that. They argue that ethnic minorities are more likely to experience relative deprivation. So relative deprivation is a feeling of being deprived or feeling poor in comparison to other people. Now, we all feel this at certain times in certain ways. So, for example, when I turn on the Kardashians and I see them all with their diamonds and their jewelry and their cars and their big houses, I feel immensely deprived. Okay, perhaps I'm not really deprived, but what I feel is relative deprivation, because relative to them, I feel poor and deprived. Now, the argument here is that ethnic minorities are more likely to experience relative deprivation because they're more likely to be in perhaps a lower level of skilled job, perhaps a less well-paid job, and that has its roots in discrimination in society. So ethnic minorities are more likely to experience discrimination and prejudice, and therefore they're less likely to be in the most highly paid jobs. That then means that they're more likely to experience poverty and relative deprivation. The second part of this is marginalization. Now, I want you to have a look at the piece of paper that hopefully is in front of you and think about where the margins of the page are. They're on the edges. And marginalisation refers to a feeling of being pushed out of central society and being pushed to the edges of society, not feeling part of society, but feeling as though you're almost unwanted, pushed out to kind of the extremities. Now, when we have feelings of marginalisation, Black and ethnic minority groups are more likely to experience marginalisation because of racism, because of discrimination, because we know that Black children are more likely to be excluded from school, because they are more likely to live in deprived areas. So when we feel marginalised and we feel relatively deprived, what this leads to is us joining subcultures. Now, there's all different types of subcultures. Some are very positive, some can be slightly negative. But what we're looking at here is the idea of a criminal subculture. So we feel relatively deprived, we feel marginalised, and this leads us to join a criminal subculture. So that's our left realists, that's their explanation. Let's have a look now at our neo-Marxists. So neo-Marxists are sort of a newish version of Marxism, okay? Again, interested in inequality, interested in issues of power. So neo-Marxists, and a particular neo-Marxist called Gilroy, believes that Black criminality is a myth. It's a myth created by racist stereotypes held by wider society and the police. So Gilroy argues that Black people are no more likely than white people to be criminal. And they're no more likely to commit crime. What he argues is that the police are acting on racist stereotypes so that Black people are more likely to be criminalised. They are more likely to be targeted, they're more likely to be arrested, and they're more likely to have custodial sentences. Now, what Gilroy does say is that when ethnic minorities do commit crime, their crimes are a form of political resistance against the racist society. So first, he says that actually Black and Asian groups are no more likely than white people to commit crime. But then he goes on to say, when they do commit crime, it is a political fight back against racism. Okay, and our third explanation, getting caught. So this argument says that Black offenders are more likely to be arrested because of the types of crime they commit. So they're more likely to commit violent crime, shoplifting, drug offences, vandalism. These are kinds of street crime. Now, they're more likely to be caught and arrested for these crimes because these are crimes where there's likely to be CCTV, and they are crimes where the victim is more likely to be able to name their perpetrator. They will name the offender because they know who that person is. So they're more likely to get caught. Now, perhaps white people are more likely to engage in the kind of middle class crimes because they haven't been kicked out of school, because they haven't been discriminated against, etc., etc., etc. They've got good jobs, which enables them to commit crimes like fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. But those are crimes where people are far less likely to get caught because it's hard to detect them. So those are three explanations that our sociologists have come up with. I'd like to pause again and have a think about whether, having heard those explanations, your opinion has changed at all. This is something that we do fairly often in day-to-day life. A sociologist called Giddens calls this reflexivity, and it's where you get new information, you add your new information to the information that you held before, and what happens is you review whether your opinion, you review whether what you thought before is actually what you still think now. So it's called reflexivity, and Giddens says that this is something that in late modern cosmopolitan society, we're doing on a day-to-day basis all the time. Okay, so let's be reflexive. Has your opinion changed? So on the left, the differences represent real differences in offending. On the right, it's racism in the police and criminal justice system. So where on the arrow would you put your opinion now? Okay, so you may or may not have changed your opinion. You may have changed it a smidge in one direction or a smidge in the other, and that's fine. It's absolutely fine to have your own opinion, and it may be that of the three explanations, one of them spoke to you more than the others. But why are sociologists interested in any of this in the first place? So I started off by saying that sociology is the study of society, but we need to think about why we study society. Why are we studying it in the first place? Sociologists study society because what they want to do is they want to try to gather evidence. They want to gather evidence and they want to make theories so that they can try and influence social policy. They want to be able to go to the government and say, this is happening, this is wrong, this is how we can fix it. That's why sociologists study society in the first place, because they want to change society. They want to improve people's lives. Now, we've been talking about ethnicity today, but actually, sociologists are really interested in ideas of equality and inequality, but it goes beyond ethnicity. We need to remember that every single individual, every single person in society has their own individual set of characteristics. So we have our ethnicity, but we also have our gender, our social class, our age. We have our faith, our culture, our sexuality. It's a complex situation. So sociologists are interested in all of those different elements of equality and inequality. And what they want to do is to try to change society, to try to make society a better place. They want to change society, they want to make it better so that what happened to George Floyd will not happen to people again in the future.